Hi everyone, I'm Stacey Messier, General Manager for CIC New England. Today we are diving into the world of flexible work, what it really means, why it matters, and how businesses can embrace it. Joining me today is Ryan McCreedy, instructor at Harvard and Senior Principal of Organizational Effectiveness at Slalom Consulting. Ryan, welcome to CIC.
Thanks,
so happy to
Stacey.
have you here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to see you.
Back at you. Been a minute.
It has been a minute. Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about some of the work that you've done recently around just flexibility in the workplace, how you're seeing, I would say, like the shift in the current culture.
Yeah. So I think during COVID, we had a lot of conversations about, how we can work from home and what does it mean to manage from home, et cetera. I think we're starting to see a renewed shift on not even past return to office. Return to office was really hot for a moment, but I think now that's settling, and I think there's still a demand to get people back in the office, but I'm seeing more people get wise about what does it mean to intelligently bring people back into the office.
I love that. What does it mean to intelligently bring people back? That's fantastic. I know I feel like the conversations I've had maybe within the last almost year has been much more so, instead of return to office, it's been work now. What does the definition of coming to work mean today? Are there any trends or say like patterns that you've seen that tend to be sticky, that you feel like leaders are actually picking up and being like, oh my gosh, this was what I was looking for? Or maybe there's a delta there and there's still some challenges.
Yeah, I still think it's kind of similar to any sort of hype curve or early adopters, right? I think we have more adopters now. I think leaders that are really hip to it, they're getting understanding of being intentional about using the space.
Yeah.
So when we have collaborative efforts or we need to brainstorm or we need more generative discussion, then it makes sense for us to be in office. But if we, just need to get into the trenches and get stuff done, I don't know about you, but I absolutely despise being on a Zoom call in the office. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
So I think people are using the tools a little bit more efficiently now, but there's still an old guard that certainly thinks of performative in office time equals productivity. And there's absolutely no data that show that that is true. That's just absolutely contrary to all evidence that exists out there, frankly.
Sort of like the culture of the old guard just coming through as opposed to actually seeing it in the data.
Yeah, but there's a war on talent, right? So I think that is putting them at a disadvantage competitively. And it's going to show up over time, and that the talent that wants that flexibility and is hip to it and wise, they're going to go to places that reward that and honor that and make sense of those policies in that way.
Well said. So let's talk a little bit more about that data and what you're seeing in the research. So Slalom's research shows that 74% of employees would consider leaving a job if they were required to be in the office 3 or more days a week. Why do you think that number is so high? Do you think it's just performative wishes, or is there something else that maybe we haven't thought of?
Yeah, I think everybody found out what their commutes could actually do, right? So you had people spending on average like over an hour one way to get to the office, and they realized that they could use that time for themselves, for their family, etc. So they're now thinking about their time investment and the ROI of their time, and they're not getting paid for that time, right? So I think that's one thing. I also know that there's a lot of data around the disparate measures of different folks in their stage of life. So
that's a good point.
Folks that are raising children, folks that are taking care of their elderly parents, et cetera, they have found space in their work-life balance in order to take on those demands. And a force to return to office without a reason why doesn't really bode them well, right? And so they're going to try to find opportunities that will work with their lifestyle and their human demands rather than just their work demands. But I think a second side of that is similar to what we were talking about, there not being evidence. A lot of these are gut plays, and they're not communicated very well with the intention why, right? So you see a lot of these, we expect you to be back X number of days. Truth be told, X number of days doesn't mean anything, right? There's no reason why. And if you ask people, and this is provocative, I dare say, but if you ask people to say, well, how are you measuring performance? I don't know a lot of business leaders that can actually answer that question. They actually do not have a measure of performance other than by observing, management by walking, which used to be a really cool thing to talk about. It used to actually be a good thing. But now I think it's very performative in that way.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm even thinking about, we look at card tap data to just try and understand foot traffic patterns, days of the week. How does it influence how many snacks we put in our kitchens, as well as what are the best days, quite frankly, for us to do scheduled engagement activities. So even on the flip side, to your point, being able to look at how many people are flowing through into a given building, and then actually just meeting people where they are, as opposed to the stern mandate of like 5 days back in, let's go.
And I think what's important too is not having that performative metric, but having that data is important. And so I'm talking to a lot of organizations around, people analytics.
Yeah.
And so how can we look at models of taking, say, badge data, but also productivity data or collaborations or sales, if you have a sales organization, and see what results in actually better outcomes, right? Actually do data science. You can actually do data science on this stuff and find out the answer. It's incredible, right? So what might be your hypotheses around some of that? And I think lacing, the data around time in office against those outcomes can be really powerful, very powerful. Attrition too, right? So
yes, that's huge.
Right, absolutely. So, I mean, some of us, I think you and I are very much so people like to be around people. So we enjoy our people time, but we also respect our home time too and boundaries.
Exactly. It's a balance.
Exactly. But I think it is important to be able to see, okay, these people, when they spend X amount of time and there's a critical mass, to your point, in office, that results in them being more engaged based off our engagement data. And it also is predictive of them being less likely to leave the company if we have like 2 years of data around that. And I think we're at a point now where we have those amounts of data.
Right.
Most organizations do post the COVID weirdness. So we can actually create like a predictive model actually of what would predict attrition or performance or burnout, et cetera, and find out, is our flexible work policy working for us or not? And how can we tweak it, right? You might be able to look at it and optimize it that way.
I love that. And that connects to a thread that I've been thinking about a ton lately, which is sort of like connecting people analytics to space type and utilization. So there are companies like Pangeum. There's a number of companies that are basically blending AI to analyze through like stick figures. They're not paying attention to what sneakers you have on today, but much more so you designed this common area or this soft seating space to be collaborative. But is it actually, or are people just sitting on their laptops and being very still? Have you seen a shift in maybe it's not as active right now, but I almost wonder, what are the data wishes you have for the next 5 years?
Oh, data wishes. That's a good one. So I'm part of a group, a coalition that is a few architecture companies and neuroscience research institutes. It's called the Building Brains Coalition. And we are coming together in order to solve exactly this problem of, let's look at the space and let's stop using these simple, vanity metrics and performative metrics to determine whether or not we're using them properly. And let's fine tune based off of the actual environment and how it affects people at a neurological level even. So my super wish list, which is creepy, but this is what I do research on, is we are starting to get biometric data in people's wearables that are clinical grade. And so we can actually look at the types of changes and fluctuations in their neurophysiology just based off that data alone and find out how an environment is engaging them, stressing them out, helping them feel more healthy, all these sorts of things. We can get a lot of metrics off of that. So when you talk about people analytics, imagine who cares about badge data then, right? Now I really care more about how is the human body and the mental state affecting the performance and those outcomes.
That's incredible. Oh my goodness. Yeah, a touch creepy, but also...
there's a lot of ethics there, but what I like to...
glad we're on the same page.
But what I like to remind people of is that organizations are already gathering a lot of behavioral data on you that you have opted into. Same with social media. And there are already ethical, guidelines around that and use of that information and protection around that information. And so in my point of view, it's very, very similar to your organization has some health record data on you, right? Well, they have some health record data on you. So they already actually know how to handle this sort of information. But I think it's just scarier for people. It's just new for people in a way to give up that information.
Yeah, that sounds right. I know I have a lot of opt-in wishes when it comes to data.
Bingo.
Thinking about how we can get even better quality clinical research to have more populations that are representative. And I feel like our business leaders, our landlords would love to actually know, this is the population that's coming in. How might we actually create a space that honors and activates in a meaningful way instead of just saying, it's a tech company, it's a biotech company, it's this, it's that.
right? What do you do with that?
There's so much more that we could do.
And I think vice versa, democratizing that data to get to the people that need it, to your point, like opt in to provide, but also opt in to receive.
Yeah.
How impactful would you like to come to a space where that there's other, biotech, startups that are complementary, or you could partner with strategically, which happens a lot here, right?
Exactly.
That would be interesting for you to know, but also some of those other things of like people have their most creative moments on a Wednesday afternoon. And we know that by looking at their hearts. Whoa, that's great. Like that's really impactful, crazy stuff.
So let's talk about some tips that we can leave people with. Mm-hmm. When you think about workplace flexibility, what is one or two things that you would like leaders to know that they could try tomorrow? Yeah.
One is you don't have to have all the answers. I think that's really hard for leaders, but I love Spotify came out with this, right? And they said, well, we're going to treat our employees like adults.
Yeah.
And you'd be amazed if you just asked the question of what would work for you in coming into the office. Like what might you hope for, right? Using some design thinking into this, right?
Absolutely.
And how might we make that a good use of your time? So co-creation is what I'm getting at. Is like as a leader, you don't have to dictate what needs to happen. Talk to the people that are the experts of their experience, your employees, and have a conversation, open up dialogue, and then co-create what the policies look like or what the best practices look like, those ways of working. And you can always change them down the road, right? I think second to that is also maybe enabling managers in order to do that, right? It doesn't look the same for every team and every function, how collaborative they need to be in office or not be in office, right? So these broad sweeping measures for a whole org don't make a lot of sense. So provide enough autonomy to the teams, but enough alignment to say, here's our goals, here's our vision of our why, right? Are we performing on our outcomes? Are we having our, business performance expectations? Are we reaching our values that we want to reach? If we're doing those things, those don't only exist inside of your, walls.
Absolutely. And actually, I have a follow-up question on that one. I'm thinking about change management. Mm-hmm. And one of the biggest lessons coming out of return to office was take a life science company, for example. So you have people that are required to be in the lab and they have to be physically present. But then you say you have your back office departments, your HR, your finance, et cetera, that can, for the most part, have a much different level of flexibility in terms of their schedules. As people grew into their autonomy and choosing and designing their version of what in office or out of office looked like, there came a great divide between the factions of those that felt like, well, I have to be here, so why do you get all the flexibility? Yeah. In your work at Slalom, or maybe some of your research, have you seen companies or leaders actually bridge those divides successfully? And if so, what are some of the ways that maybe leaders can think about having these conversations? Because those seem tricky, and while not the most conflict laden, they do seem like quite a lift.
Yeah. I've seen a few different things, right? So some folks are taking like more of an approach of they have the answer to that. And it's just co-locating disparate groups that usually wouldn't be next to each other in order. So like, for instance, you're seeing a lot of, our biotech and biopharma, they're taking the finance function, they're putting them right next to a lab where like they're literally right next to them, right? They're walking past people doing like gene editing and stuff.
Yeah.
And so they start to have a greater appreciation for like, wait, that's what we're doing here, And so I can see an impact of that. I can see that there's some positive value there. Worked with a client very recently actually on this exact issue because they had an office and there was a lot of people in labs, but there was a lot of people that weren't in labs, a lot of other corporate functions out of this office. And so dare I say it, I'm going to sound like a broken record, a lot of dialogue. Right. Let's just talk about it, right? Let's have a conversation on what are our values? What are our cultural norms? What does it mean to be here? And I think when they see their peers that don't have the luxury of that flexibility based off their job function, and then they see themselves, but they see the common mission and vision, they see the reason why the contact time is valuable and why those ideas can spread, et cetera. But again, it comes not from leaders having the answer. It comes from leaders being the facilitator to find the answer. And I think that's a paradigm shift for a lot of folks that's uncomfortable, frankly, right? Because it's like, that's messy. That's going to take a lot of time. To me, would you rather spend the time to get it right and have that conversation now? Or would you like to continue to
let it fester?
Yeah, even like furthering those divides. Because frankly, leaders will tend to do that, right? Under those business units. So like continue to say, no, this is what we do. This is what we do. No, what about this is what we all do? And help to come to that conversation and appreciation for the nuance, right?
It's interesting how many parallels there are between solving for sort of like workspace challenges and just a general piece of conflict.
It's all a challenge.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Somebody feels away. There's been an impact from that behavior that led to some sort of action, whether inadvertent or purposeful. Almost always
othering.
Exactly. It's always inadvertent, and leading with the best intentions, of course. Yeah. But being able to unpack that in a really safe and respectful way.
Yeah, and I think that changes the role of the leader, right? Because in order to lead through that change, or really any change, be it in the physical space, be it remote work, or strategy, anything, you have to be able to hold that space rather than just say what you already been told to say, so many times. Like, stop repeating yourself so much of like, you have to have the answer. It's very uncomfortable. The second thing I think leaders can really do is around clarifying, like, what are our norms when we are working remotely or we're working hybrid, et cetera.
Yes.
I like to think of it as hybrid inclusive, right?
Ooh, I like
hybrid.
That.
I say hybrid first because there's so much data around disparities of people that work remotely.
Right.
Even before COVID. So
I remember those days very well. And like the one or two staff members that were working
never gonna
from
get
Colorado.
Promoted. Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel forgotten.
What do they do here?
Right.
Exactly. Decreased promotion rates, decreased performance rates, often related to gender and family status, right? So you got a lot of people that were disparaged in that way. So what I like to do is consider, one, can we create our norms, but also we have to educate the team on what could be good norms for us to pull off of, and then communicate those back out and hold ourselves accountable to them. So a few examples of that might be if we're working as a hybrid in a hybrid meeting, some of us are in the office, some of us aren't. Let's make sure we call in the folks that are on the call first, because our tendency is we're right here, we're going to speak quicker, and that 5 millisecond delay of the internet is going to cause us to, have a challenge. So call in remote folks first. Make sure that you're pulling them into the conversations and stuff like that, right? Make those sorts of commitments. Have those common days, right? That's a very common thing. It's like, what's our day of the week that's common for us to all be there together and have those. Was recently talking to a leader. We had a meeting and we had a no laptop meeting because nobody needed the laptop because nobody wasn't in the room. And I was like, wow, do you remember when that just was what we did?
Right.
So like incredible that happened. There was also time between meetings then too, but that's a whole nother topic. But at any rate, establish those norms. And what I like to generally see is literally like 9 norms, nine group agreements, like simple one sentence or phrases that like everybody can remember at a team level, because it works at each team level. And then just communicate those out over and over and over again and hold yourselves accountable to them. And then say, if we're violating one of those norms, we talked about this already, I don't think we're doing this, do retros or whatever you need to do on that.
I also love infusing a touch of, I'm going to call it workplace appropriate silliness. Because sometimes like when people hear like hold you accountable, it feels like being put in the corner. I worked at one company that one of my favorite things, whenever somebody interrupted and didn't let the remote person talk, a rubber chicken was thrown on the table.
Oh, I love that.
It's just like totally silly, very benign, but everybody knew what the definition of the chicken was.
Yep.
So even creating some symbol, and I'm a big fan of devices. So not necessarily like your phone is a device, but like the rubber chicken is the device that then helps hold everybody accountable, and anybody could throw it.
Absolutely. That's so funny. I actually know a very similar situation of someone who was an executive at Disney, and they had like 5 stuffed Disney characters, and whenever the character was showing in like a negative or a positive way, they would throw. So apparently people are throwing characters all over the place, but they would throw the plushie into the room and be like, this is what's happening. Ursula's showing.
Ooh.
So I love that.
Ursula.
Little Ursula vibes. Yeah.
Something else I feel like I have carried forward from my days of working in software and technology into now working in space and physical, sort of like the intersection of real estate and hospitality, is over communicating where we are. So as a regional person, I am traveling amongst 4 different buildings in any given week. So letting my teams know I'm going to be here today. Here's when you can't reach me, but then making that a habit for everybody. So we've got a really good culture, even though it is a very much in-person workplace. We use those chat tools to basically give everybody the same heads up to one another, regardless of your level, your hierarchy, whatever it is. The culture is,
if I need to find Ryan, where can I find him?
Yeah.
Oh, he already dropped it in and said he's got an appointment this morning. Cool. And it's just normal.
Yeah, I love that. That's great. And there's like that working from elsewhere. Like I think a lot of people forget, like they've really expanded these tools from when we first had them.
It's so true.
Right. So you can put in like very detailed information, and it seems like a lot, but after you build it into your norm, I imagine it's not that difficult for you. You're just like, and you expect it from each other, and you're like, oh, that's nice. Oh, you're here. Oh, cool.
Right.
You're not? Cool too. Now I know. That's awesome. That's a good one.
So how do you define flexible workplace in today's professional landscape? What comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I think it's hard. So, I mean, there's that. I could use a consulting answer of it depends. I think flexibility is similar to safety. I think it is often misunderstood and or misused. And so I think flexibility and safety are both thought of as like giving complete providence to the individuals, right? Or like not really, maybe being too safe, let's say, right? So for me, flexible work is like balancing that alignment, right, of what we achieve or what we want to achieve with each other, with the ability to have the autonomy to find out how to do it. So what I mean by that is, again, if we define our values and how we derive value for organizations or businesses, what have you, or what we want our spaces to be like, right? So like, this is how we intend to use these spaces, or here's our objectives of coming into the office. Well, those are the outcomes that we can be aligned on. But the autonomy of how you do that doesn't need to be, you need to do that on Wednesday, right? It's like, if you know, like, we want to be creative, we want to be collaborative, we want to mess around with sticky notes, get our hands dirty when we have these tough challenges, how you decide how to go about that is up to you, right? And just provide that balance between those two things. Amy Edmondson, which she's from the area here, around psychological safety, the other way that she puts it on a matrix is psychological safety and accountability, which I know we were talking about accountability a moment ago. It's like not evil accountability. It's just, it's not full safety of do whatever you want flexibility. That's not what people are talking about. It is, let's find a way to co-create our norms and find out what it means for us to socially construct what it means to be flexible working.
Yeah.
But then that means that we're going to operate by that and hold each other to that standard, perhaps, or call each other into that way. And I think that's
that
important.
idea of developing it as a set of standards.
Yeah. It's like a culture, right? You're like creating a microculture. And I think that's huge. Like when you think of space and how we work, I think people think of culture like as the thing on the wall with the words, right? But to your point, like you can kind of just pull these things together and we can make them, you know what I mean? We can define what that should be. But then it's very easy to understand when we're not living by it.
Makes sense. So a moment ago, we were talking about the performative nature that return to office and work now vibes can be. If you were to design a set of metrics, how would you measure flexible workspace utilization? What does that look like to you?
Yeah. So obviously every organization is together to deliver value, right? Yep. Every group, etc. So how do you define that value? And one of the ways I like to think about this for like the tech teams watching, they're working like agile, right? Velocity has been the metric forever.
Totally.
Right?
Yep.
So everybody talks about velocity, velocity, velocity. Is that really measuring value? Going to get even more provocative there, right? So the speed at which work gets done doesn't necessarily mean that it's valuable work that's getting done.
Right.
And I think we try to find, I was working with a group of senior leaders at an organization once, and we had this conversation of like, what are the actual outcomes you were trying to deliver within your business? And how would you measure that? And they're like, oh, we can't measure this. And that sounds hard. I was like, well, yeah, it is hard, but that's like, that's what you do. And I think it's just uncomfortable for people. I think, frankly, people don't know how. And so one of the ways that I think of, and a tool that one of my good friends in the product development space uses this, is just the word "so that." So we're going to do this so that, and if you can finish that ad lib, that's the value.
Yeah.
Now you might have to create a whole project on how to measure that value, but I think that's helpful, right? So we're going to come back on Wednesdays and Thursdays into the office, or we expect people there, so that so that we can be more productive. Oh, tell me more. As measured by. That's my other one that I use often, is as measured by. So how do you measure productivity? going to be a pause there, right? And it might be, well, the number of people that are in the office clicking away at keyboards. Like, no, we've been there before. That's not true.
Right.
So then I think it's like an onion,
yeah,
right? There's so many layers to this. But one of the things I like to think of is like, what are our business, our overall business mission, vision, values? How do we, like, what are our largest OKRs of our strategy? And then work our way downward in a cascading way. And this has existed for a long time. This is like balanced scorecard strategy stuff for the MIT friends in the room. So I think it's actually a lot easier than people give it credit to by finishing with ad libs. But it doesn't happen often. I think it's actually a very uncomfortable truth to a lot of business leaders, though a lot of businesses are not measuring actual outcomes. They're not actually measuring how they deliver value. And so there's a lot of disjointed things. I'm sure you've worked on that before, where like you're in a business and it's like, at this level, we have this plan. At this level, we have this plan.
Oh, yeah.
They don't tie together in any way.
Waterfall. But they're three separate waterfalls.
Yeah, exactly. Not even connected. Not at all. Not at all.
I'm also thinking about, I ran a workshop last year with a group of really talented HR leaders. And one of their biggest struggles is their ability to go to the C-suite, their executive board, whatever it is, and say, I actually need an increased budget so that I can improve our workplace to adapt our conference rooms that cannot do Zoom well, for example, and upgrade their technology. Or I want to spend some money on a product that could help us measure X, Y, and Z. What I'm hearing in your answer is that there's an opportunity for us to think about both the value, but then also by measuring that, we can get data that helps us go to bat for reinvesting in the business that allows us to deliver on more value.
100%. Yeah, it is a bit of a chicken and the egg, right? Because it's like, oh, that's the thing we should be measuring. Oh, but how do we measure it? Oh, once we measure it, oh my goodness, we can't unsee that, right?
Right.
Which is actually really interesting. Like I have heard before a few times where organizations will start measuring the things that they want to measure, and they're so dissatisfied by it that they turn off the engine, you know what I mean? I might cut that. It's scary, right? But I love that very particular point of view, because I think particularly in IT and HR, they often feel like they're the order takers historically, right? They're the functions that are just told what to do, and strategic thinkers strategize, right? That's increasingly changing, right? IT and HR have totally been at the seat. And actually, I think with flexible work and the conversation we're having, it has put the people and technology so much more into the fore of how do we make those right. And so it's interesting because a lot of groups that I work with in both IT and in HR, when they do start to have those measures and they start to get, very tactical on how are people using conference room spaces, what are our challenges there, what's the cost of these dropped calls, right?
Right.
Productivity, attrition, right? All that fun stuff.
Service blueprint.
Right.
Circling where the... Ooh.
Now we have the value drivers for the business, and the business can't argue with that because it is the truth, right? It's a single source of truth based off of data. It's evidence-based. And so I think they think that the business already knows these things.
Right.
They'd be very surprised when they go, and oftentimes they are like, hey, I did this homework. And they're like, oh, how'd you do that? So it's like, yeah, you've been an order taker, but it's not like they have more information than you do. And you can become a strategic partner to the business and help drive those business outcomes for everyone.
I'm also reminded too that there is a highfalutin way to get your data, right? That probably costs a pretty penny of 5 figures or more. There's, process and status and brand of who is helping you to get there. But also sometimes you just have to start scrappy and start with a spreadsheet.
Quick and dirty.
And just start tracking stuff. Get a tiny team together to create that, task force to measure a thing and just see, can you successfully measure it in order to know this is worth leveling up and actually increasing larger efforts around.
Yeah, exactly. I always think of it as there's hypothesis development, then hypothesis confirmation, right? It's very much so design thinking still, right? These diamonds. And so to your point, like let's start somewhere with the hypothesis and let's just gather data. Like how much time is spent in these conference rooms, or how much time isn't spent in those conference rooms that you wish was, right?
The anti-goals are often more interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And then have that conversation. And to your point, maybe those are like rough order of magnitudes for now in an Excel spreadsheet. Average it out with like conversations with disparate parts of the business and be like, I'm seeing a trend here. That's fine. You don't need some massive tech architecture to do this stuff, right? A lot can be accomplished in this world with sticky notes and a marker. get people in a room, have a conversation.
You are preaching to the choir.
I know. A lot of people doing that in a room with sticky notes and a marker. So the space matters, but yeah.
But also digital tools like Miro and Mural, you know, there's ways to make it work for hybrid folks as well as fully virtual teams.
Absolutely. That intentionality behind use of space, right, is going to become so much more important. Like I think people are going to crave office, not employers that allow flexibility, but also when they do use the office space, it has to help them with these different ways of working, right? Here's our collaboration space. Here's our mission command. You know, like here's my like isolated room where I do need to be on that virtual call.
What I'm thinking about is it's that, and I almost wonder if we're going back to what we saw. I don't know if it was like post-recession, but I just remember like the big office parks that, like I'm thinking like when Staples built out their massive building, when Loctite built their massive building, and there were amenity spaces that were built in because they knew that they had to make it a hub that would be as frictionless as possible for their employees. And I feel like I'm having more and more conversations about bringing back almost like office park level amenities. Not because we want to keep you in the office for 24/7, but also because we know, to your earlier point about the commute, that it better be worth it.
The value
better be worth it.
The value proposition has to be extremely high. I love that. Absolutely. It's like intentionality of spaces, like when you're in the office. It is adjacency to really, to your point, attractive things. We actually right now, Slalom Boston is looking into whether we stay or move, et cetera. And, you know, we asked our employees about what are some of the things that they're most interested in. They wanted to be near good food. They wanted to be near a gym. They wanted to be near public transportation, you know, all those things. And then there was a lot of internal amenities too, of course. But I think it's that community building that I think, you know, you almost have, it's not even like, to your point, it's not because you're trying to subjugate the people to work more.
Exactly.
It's like, you don't have a choice. The demands are high.
Because I feel like during the perks era, it's like 2014 to 2016 felt like very much like, if your office can feel like a clubhouse, this is the place for you. We're moving away, and finally as a culture, I think recognizing that it's more than pizza. It's more than just a cold brew tap, but that people really want to know that you as a company have invested in the choices that you have power over to be able to make something that is worthwhile for your employee base.
And to your point, like the performative inauthentic choices are so clear now.
It just sticks out like a sore thumb.
I used to, before COVID, I called it the ping pong table test. Because how many people had ping pong tables that were dusty?
So many.
Right? It was real cool looking, but nobody's out there using it. It's like, all right, nice try. Like, that's not your culture. Clearly that's not your culture, otherwise it'd be used, you know?
There are those two guys.
And they're getting fired next week.
Every Friday. Okay.
But on how all this plays out and future trends, et cetera, I think our market is very unstable at the moment. So employees particularly, aren't using their power, I guess you could, in the same way. Probably their choices. They don't have as much choice as they did, you know, even like a year or two ago. Right?
It feels the pendulum has definitely swung.
The pendulum has swung. And so I think once the market, you know, comes back to stability or corrects, et cetera, I do think that in the long term, those that do choose more flexible options will win the best talent. I think that's true in a hard time too, but it's going to be the most hypo that know that they're, you know, the hot stuff. They're going to make the choice to go where that's rewarded. Those that might be a little bit more cautious and risk, you know, adverse, they're not going to do it right now. But in the future, if you want the best talent, you're going to have the best flexible policy, frankly.
What's interesting about that is we've heard in our own market research data that we've pulled primarily from existing clients that one of the key reasons why they like having their office space here or a desk or whatever it may be is because they learn how to create their own company culture.
I love that.
So when they graduate into their own space, they've adopted the things that they've really enjoyed just by learning how we as CIC staff organize both ourselves as well as the community, as well as what is the level of intentionality around the signage that's on the coffee machine when it's down. How are you talking to your employees and the people that move within your space in a way that gets back to our earlier point of we're all knitting the fabric of culture together. But it was so wonderfully astounding to hear how many people, when they graduate out of here, get their own lease or sublease somewhere else. And they're like, we have taken so much because of what we've learned from being at CIC, which
incredible.
Is just unbelievable.
Yeah. That's like so anthropological too, right? Because like, if you're not like intentional about that space making, you know what I mean? You're leaving it to chance. But I like how you're sharing, like when it is intentional and it does reflect the culture, it has like a facsimile effect, right? Like it continues to reproduce and reinforce the culture. And I think people just miss out on that. Like your space really, really influences you and how you work. That's huge. So I love that. That's a cool story. That's awesome.
Hey, thanks.
We were talking earlier a little bit about like co-creation and how does that work and communicating, et cetera. And like, what have you seen that's successful in like gathering information from employees, let's say, in terms of feedback and co-creating?
I'm a big fan of, what's the way to summarize this? A softer qualitative approach mixed with a harder quantitative approach. Mm-hmm. I want to gut check my hypothesis first by having one-on-one interviews. So I'll do, IDPs, in-depth processing, essentially, and sit down and sort of do at least 3 conversations worth and realize very quickly, I'm asking this wrong, I've missed asking about this, or, we need a multiple choice, but then we also need an open-ended question here because there's clearly some very rich data.
I love that.
So you almost have to test the questions that have been rolling around in your head like marbles with just a few people that are representative enough. And then if you can get that interview structure down enough that you feel confident that like having that long form qualitative data is worthwhile, I say go to town. 6 as the minimum, but 12 is great. And then send out a survey that matches that. And then you can really get into, if you have the ability to do logic with like if-then statements, right? To be able to say, because we know going in as researchers that we're always going to have segments that are going to align with, these people care deeply about heads down work because they are software engineers. These people care deeply about in-person protocols and standardization because they are scientists.
Yep.
But at the highest level, they may care deeply about the lobby experience in similar ways.
Yes.
So being able to get at the nuances of the personas within your own employee base, and then analyzing that data together.
I love that. I love that you particularly said analyzing that data together, because I think people start off with a persona hypothesis and they miss the bigger point. Like the actual value add is a thing that everybody talked about in a small way.
Yes.
Rather than like one group was yelling about, right? Or
squeaky wheels are not necessarily representative of all squeaky wheels.
So true. So true. I love that. Yeah, I love that. I think the other thing I see often is like being very intentional about not asking for things that you don't intend to at least represent back on how you might do something about it, right?
Say more about what you mean by that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of organizations will be like, we want to improve our culture. How can we improve our culture? And then everybody said this. Well, we'll do that later. You know what I mean? And I think that that's a really big thing in like, people analytics is like, don't collect data that you don't want the answers to, or that you're not going to action on. But I think it's also hard because, to your point, I appreciate that, this quant qual, you do both together, or you find, some semblance of it, because I think it's really important to emerge what the actual challenge is. I think like you and I are systems thinkers, so I think it's really easy. A lot of people just be like, what are our 5 Likert questions? What's our 1 to 5 that we need to ask? And it's like, that's 5 lines, but there's infinite lines that you missed in between them.
Yes.
And start with not an answer in mind, right? It goes back to like not having an answer as a leader. And I love like the just start, stop, continue. Like, what are we doing that's working? What are we doing that's not working? What's missing?
Yep.
And then to your point, do some clustering and be like, there's some themes here. There's something, there's a there. Yeah.
The other thing I really enjoy doing, particularly for teams or even organizations that feel like, well, the ask is they want a golf simulator and we don't have money for that. Start smaller than that.
Yeah.
Figure out if the answer is actually something around like a non-work task related engagement activity. many words for a very simple answer. Create a little task force around that to then go off and really dig deeply with their fellow employees. Now, they're not hearing it from us as leaders. They're hearing it from their peers, which the value of that is tenfold. And then they can bring it back and say, hey, Ryan, I know we're not yet working on the 2026 budget, but what we've discovered is if we invest maybe $5,000 in doing X, Y, and Z next year, we could actually see outcome A, outcome B.
Yep.
And now you're making both the process of why some of these things take so long to becoming action, but also you're inviting them into that process.
And they're invested.
Yes.
Yes.
And the operations side is often just like shoved, in a notebook, in a spreadsheet somewhere else. Yep. Oh, well, that's so-and-so's responsibility. When in fact, it can be everybody's responsibility without the burden.
I so love that. One of my favorite projects ever was actually with our friends Takeda here. Takeda had a group that was challenged with their ways of working, and there's just a lot of like miscommunication, let's say, right? And so we did exactly that. Rather than us saying like, we're going to send out a survey or anything like that, we did a lot of interviews, we got a lot of data, formed some hypotheses of some themes that we're filling up. We didn't say what to do with that, right?
Right.
They themselves got into a room in their Experience Design Center, and we did how might we exercises on every key theme.
I love it.
We had illustrative quotes, that kind of thing. They ideated, then they went back around and they dot voted on each other's ideas. And then we prioritized those. And then to your point, action teams. So the group, they self-organized.
Yeah.
And then they did everything. They did all the work.
There's so much power in it.
So much power.
Encouraging, but also enabling people to vote with their feet.
Yes, exactly. And they're like doing it. And it was like, everything from like how to do systems automation to how to have better, after hour drinks and happy hours with each other to get to know each other as humans. It was like everything, but they created these little committees out of it, and workplace engagement went up like crazy, like 20% shifts in workforce engagement in just a few months after they did that, because they're a part of it. And look, like who's actually doing more work and less happy? Nobody, right?
I think people make the mistake of asking too broad of a question. You're actually better off going real narrow and saying, we don't have a lot of money.
Providing the context.
What is your top 3 ideas on something that you believe, hypothesize to be a low cost opportunity for us to invest in, and tell me what that looks like in practice. But by giving people just enough of the context to add that sort of closing of the aperture to really zoom in on, if you don't want big, fancy, ultra expensive ideas, then don't ask for them.
Yeah.
Don't leave room.
Yeah.
Be specific, be targeted, ask for what you're looking for.
And my yes and to that is you could even add the so that statement, and you might find out there's a cheaper solution to get the same outcome.
Yep.
Going back to your like golfing simulator, it's not about the golfing simulator. Nobody cares about the golfing simulator. It's about that connection time, or that time to blow off steam or connect with others. Like, okay, well, not a pizza party, but there might be another option for you there.
Right. Potlucks have been around for decades.
That's true.
This is why.
How often do you think organizations should revisit their space strategy, and or like how? What should they consider?
On one hand, it depends. On the other hand, I feel like bare minimum annually. We are in New England, where we have 4, sometimes 6 different seasons of weather. And the swing of attitudes about space legitimately changes with the swing of the weather.
Love that.
And asking people in the summer what they would want to do differently or see differently, or if we had X amount of dollars to invest, what should we do, is going to be very different than when we ask in the winter. So maybe I'm going to change my answer and say, at minimum, if you're in a climate that has a lot of change, twice a year.
Yeah.
Twice a year, because the seasonality affects how we think, and it creates bias that is natural and organic.
That's really cool.
But what people are looking for and hungry for, may be very different. Like, I remember during lockdown, I had a team that just ended up using their sort of like perfunctory funds to download gorgeous images from Getty. So we had like a stock photo membership, right, for marketing purposes and whatever else, but it became our ability to create spring break. And so everybody's digital backgrounds and their wallpapers were like Bora Bora, Belize. It was the Amalfi Coast. It was like, where do you wish you could go?
Yeah.
And we were in the middle of the early stages of the pandemic, but it was also getting colder. And we just wanted to be somewhere tropical and beautiful.
Yeah.
And so how do you create that? And
that's fun.
How does your space change? Like, Christmas in July, but what's the inverse?
Yeah. I like that. That's cool.
All right, Ryan. So to close us out, what is one thing that you're actually looking forward to in the near future?
Yeah. I think I told you like the Building Brains Coalition and like neuroscientists, and people are space making all coming together. I think we're seeing like not a renaissance, but really like an expansion of how like neuroscience can help make our work lives better. And so in particular, I've done some research that I've just completed, and you can actually use biomarkers, biometric data to predict how a team will feel about them working together and their team effectiveness before they've even worked together.
Wild.
Absolutely wild. And so what it looks like is basically fluctuations in synchronies in people's heart rates together even is predictive by about 30% of some of their subjective experiences before they've even worked in a team together, of how they'll report how they did work on a team after working in a group on a task. And so by having that like kind of even just 5 minutes of data before a team works together can actually be predictive of those outcomes of were they supported? Do they feel like they had enough psychological safety? Do they feel like they coached each other in an adequate way through the solution? And I think that's really powerful. So how can we start to pull in some more of the things like that to even democratize it to the team so that the teams can say, now's not the time for us to go do this thing, right? Let's look at my Apple Watch and there's, some apps around this eventually. For us to make the right decisions and go do more productive work together. And I think that same data could be used for the space, right? How is the space impacting the synchrony and us working together as a team? So I think it's a really fascinating phenomenon of people's like nervous systems getting in sync, but then the fact that it's predictive of these outcomes is pretty powerful.
That's incredible. It makes me think of when I first discovered personality assessments, working style assessments, and for the companies that you were interviewing with, right, that you had to take an assessment before you could even move through your interview rounds just to see, and depending on how the company used it, to figure out like, do we have too many of that style versus we want to create a diversity of approaches. That's fascinating. I'm very excited.
And I think it has all the same challenges as those do too. It's like, what are the biases in this? What happens to people that aren't neurotypical? Do they show up in sync the same way?
Right.
There's a lot more research to be done, but it's happening like crazy right now. It's
Sounds
really
like
exciting.
There's some strong signals.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Love that.
Thank you for asking.
Well, thanks for joining us today. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I really appreciate the deep dive, and it's just wonderful to just think expansively about flexible workspace and how all of these different facets can come together to create that intentional culture you and I are very passionate about.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Thanks for dorking out.